Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Milena, for making this happen. I'm really excited to talk to all of you. As she was saying, I'm a computational social scientist, bunch of interest in social movements and news media space. So this is going to be in the news media space. And we're going to be talking about display advertising and its connections to the disinformation ecosystem. So I'm sure all of you know, the last few years especially have brought a lot of attention to the problem of disinformation, and especially to the role, oh, this is not working again. Okay. Okay. Maybe I need to go click on the thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. And so a lot of attention, especially attention to social media and companies like Facebook and the role that they play in the disinformation ecosystem. And a lot of scholars and pundits alike are calling out social media platforms for creating a haven for misinformation and basically affecting a trust in our institutions and democratic institutions. And indeed, social media are certainly ubiquitous and certainly, given how involved they are in our lives, shape our behaviors individually and collectively. And of course, they have failed at several occasions to follow their own policies and failed to share data to bring accountability. So therefore, of course, the scrutiny is well justified. However, I would like to point out that misinformation problem predates and also extends beyond social media, right? So the historic lens can help us understand that the problem itself is systemic and therefore requires systematical solutions. And moving beyond just the history, but even looking at today, recent studies are also showing a strong demand effect in that a lot of people that are exposed to misinformation are really sort of people who are seeking such content out across multiple channels, including social media. So the effect of just doing things through social media is perhaps somewhat uncertain, given the counterfactual of if they were to disappear, they would still be able to access that information one way or another. So perhaps more importantly for this study that I'm going to be presenting, a lot of attention has been on this dissemination part, which is social media, and consumption part, which is like, why is it that people are consuming that? But there's something that is upstream from that, and that's production, right? And I would argue that there's a lot of attention in this last two, but not as much attention on the production side. And that's important to address, given one, it's upstream. And two, even though like these sites that are producing this bad content are long tail, they don't themselves have as much sort of readership or viewership. Sometimes what they do produce does get picked up by bigger channels like cable news, which is actually much bigger than social media. And these channels can echo what they are saying, and sometimes intentionally or unintentionally. And this is especially the case. It's not that counterintuitive because these mainstream sites index political elite language. And as we have seen in a recent study, they do that irrespective of accuracy. So they just are repeating what the political elites are saying, and political elite, unfortunately, are more and more or less and less concerned about the accuracy of the things that they are sharing. So overall, I guess what I'm trying to say is that social media is one aspect of it, but really need to think about broader mechanisms through which production, dissemination, and consumption happens, and think about these mechanisms and thinking about curbing misinformation through a systematic way. So how do we do that? I've been relying on the socioeconomic theory of regulation called the pathetic dot theory, introduced by Larry Lessig in his 1999 book, Code 2.0, which is actually a really fascinating read. I highly recommend. Lessig is a legal scholar. So according to this theory, our behaviors are this pathetic dot. There are 4 regulators that act upon them. We have laws that constrain through the punishment that they threaten, norms that constrain through the stigma that a community imposes, markets that constrain through the price that they exact, and architectures that constrain through the physical burdens that they impose. So in the online world, architectures, this is the code. This is the code of the platforms that we are interacting with. So this can apply to various different behaviors. And here we're going to be thinking about applying them to disinformation. And you can think about all of these regulators working just as well in this context. For instance, you could have lawmakers that introduce bills to regulate speech. And the degree to which different countries would be comfortable in doing that is a function of obviously the values, right? In the US, freedom of speech is really one of the big sort of pillars, and therefore ideas to regulate are maybe less common there, but even in the US, some ideas are coming about. Norms, the communities, online communities that you are a part of can have rules to ban low quality news content. So here we're looking at an example. This is Reddit, a platform that I study commonly in my research. We're looking at the Elizabeth Warren subreddit, and you can see that they have an explicit rule against having misleading content and bad source. So if you are in that community and you're trying to share these things, your content would be deleted, perhaps you will be banned. So this is a direct way that such behavior will be regulated. And coming to markets, consumers, advertisers, ad firms can make it less profitable to produce false information. So here there are also examples. Here I'm showing you the example of Sleeping Giants. This was a collective that happened around started around 2018. Basically, consumer activists online would go to Breitbart, take a screenshot of an advertising with basically the bad Breitbart content next to it, tweet it out to the advertiser and say, hey, do you really want this to be your brand? And it really had a huge effect, and they lost a lot of revenue, a lot of advertisers that way. And architectures, well, platforms can make it easier to detect false information, make it harder to spread it through their UIs, through their algorithms, and so forth, right? So this is where the social media stuff more comes into play. And many examples of that, I'm giving us an example from the land that I'm coming from, but it applies more generally. So this is Twitter around 2020, where they were flagging false content, even when it was coming from, at the time, the president of the United States. So all of these regulators are really worthwhile considering, and according to Lessig, it's really worthwhile considering how they interact with each other as well. So in this talk, I'm going to be focusing on one of them, market. And I'm going to be, of all the different kinds of agents that are in this market space, we're going to be focusing on 2 of them, ad firms and advertisers, the brands. And we're going to be talking about how are they currently supporting misinformation producers, and what would happen, presumably, if you could convince them to blacklist the misinformation producers, what kind of effect can we have in this space? And I want to point out that there are all kinds of advertising, right? We're going to be focusing on online display advertising. So we're going to be looking at the false, misinformation producers as they behave in the online world, and not to the degree that you would think about Fox News or Newsmax and so forth as producers of misinformation. This is not what this is. This is online written content. Okay, so for me to give you the results of our study, I need everyone to have at least some high-level understanding of how display advertising works. Understanding it fully is going to be way beyond this talk. I don't think I fully understand how it works. It's really a big mess. But I want to give a sort of high-level summary. So here we are on zerohedge.com. This is a domain that's classified as a misinformation producer according to multiple fact checkers and scholars shared lists. So we are at its homepage. You can see that it has some sort of actual news content, but it has a bunch of ads here, right? So let's focus on one of them. Let's hover over this one, the Motley Fool. if you hover over it and if you look at the link that it's pointing to, it's not pointing you directly to Motley Fool, right? It's pointing you to googleadservices.com, something. So what's happening here is, again, this sort of caricature of this display advertising space. We have three types of actors. We have publishers. So Zero Hedge is a publisher, right? Publishers, give content for consumers to read, but they also basically have space on their pages to host, to show ads, and that's how they make money, right? And a lot in the current display advertising system, a lot of these advertisements are going through middlemen called basically the ad firms that are all connected in this ad exchanges. So here, Zero Hedge allocated the space to Google Ad Services that is running real-time auctions to decide which ads are going to go in this space. So once you load the page, in this case, Motley Fool won. When it won, you saw its ad. It gets Zero Hedge gets money from Motley Fool, but through Google Ad Services, that gets a cut, right? So that's basically the space. Everybody's happy, Google Ad Services and Zero Hedge gets money, Motley Fool gets exposure, and maybe you click the link and buy something. I do want to point out that this is only a part of the display advertising ecosystem. So you're looking at the non-guaranteed selling channel or the real-time buying channel, but there's also the guaranteed selling channel or the direct sales between like where the advertisers and publishers work directly together. But those tend to happen with really big advertisers and big publishers, and they're sort of less relevant in this long tail of bad producer space where you're not going to see Nike people going and working with Zero Hedge to have their content published there. So this is the space, and as you might guess, this is a very lucrative business, right? So, so for instance, following the 2016 elections, we were seeing all these news stories about the teens in the Balkans that were absolutely not ideologically aligned one way or another, but they were producing content that was aligned with Trump supporters, bringing them to their site, and then basically getting a lot of money through ads. So basically, this is the space that we're going to be looking at, and we're going to be looking at the role of ad firms. So this is like Google Ad Services and so forth. In one paper, so this is from last year's ICWSM, and then the advertisers, this is journal QD, which is a descriptive work journal, which I really enjoy a lot of studies from. So that one is going to be on the advertisers. So starting with the ad firms, the high-level question we're trying to get at is, can ad firms blocking low credibility sites help curb misinformation? So that's sort of what we're trying to understand. Policy and legal scholarship suggests that there is some promise here. Like there's a theoretical promise that yes, this could work, but we really need empirical data to help answer this question by answering these following three questions. The first is, the effectiveness of such an approach is dependent on the degree to which these low credibility publishers are even ad supported. If they're not getting money from ads, you try to do something in that space is not going to affect them. So how much are these producers relying on ad support? The second question is, even if they're ad supported, but they are relying on a long tail of small ad firms, some of which might be risky themselves, it would be not a great strategy, right? We want to be able to reach out to a few ad firms, convince them to change their behavior and have a huge effect, as opposed to having to deal with thousands of ad firms, some of which are serving malware and viruses. So presumably they don't care about their credibility, and you're not going to make a normative statement about our information and environment and get them to change their behavior. So that's why we're interested in this concentration question. And finally, this is a business. So at the end of the day, these ad firms are making money out of this. So we want to understand how much money are they really making out of this. So that would be if we can convince them to get sort of, give up that revenue stream. Okay, so those are the questions. To answer these questions, we had this basically a long-running data collection mechanism. In the first step, we need to identify a set of low credibility and traditional news sites. Here, we're not just making that judgment ourselves. We're relying on basically a meta-analysis of past work to identify commonly used lists. And we did robustness checks to see if they were affecting our sort of downstream analysis. But basically relying on fact checkers and scholars and how they define who is a low credibility versus high credibility news producer. I will go back to this. It's a very challenging task. I will go back to this at close to the end. Once we have this list of domains, we use Selenium API, which is a web emulator, to visit their home pages on a daily basis. So we use this headless browser to automate browsing behavior, load the page, load the ads on the page, extract ad-related URLs from the web page iframes, using a list of ad servers produced by privacy and security research. And as I said before, so it gives basically all of these things. And as I said before, it's a really messy area. So we had to do a lot of work afterwards to do cleanups here. We, for instance, had to filter out the trackers ourselves. So there are lots of ad servers that are serving you ads, but there are lots of ad servers that are just tracking you. And that's super interesting, but they're not really directly giving money to the publisher. So we needed to filter those out. We also needed to identify the credibility of the servers themselves. As I said, there are ones that are like serving malware and viruses. And we sort of are, from the get-go, we gave up on trying to reach out to those folks in this strategy. So, and for that, we are again relying on lists by privacy and security researchers, but we also used the URLs in our set to identify if they included any malware or viruses. So at the end, what we have is a bunch of news producers, traditional and low credibility, and the ad servers that are serving ads on them, and 1.3 million ads served by roughly 600 ad servers in a 12-week period. And we looked at sort of the outrageous, the bad fake stuff and the low quality stuff separately, and they give like substantively the results are similar. I'm going to mostly focus on this outrageous, the bad stuff in this talk. Yeah.
So how do you deal with the fact that ads could be customized? So when you were doing
great question. Yeah. So that one has implications for our retailer focused study. There we are only able to sort of describe the world as seen through incognito browsing, but it doesn't affect the ad firm analysis, because still the same ad firm is serving you the ad, irrespective of whether or not like what profile you have. So they will use the profile to choose the retailer, which is why the retailer analysis is sort of more sensitive to this. But in terms of which ad firms are serving it, it's the same.
But you were not using any cookies, and so
yeah. So these are empty cookies. So basically, we are acting as if it's a.
And did you kind of refresh after every click, right? Because of the trackers.
Yeah. Yes. We're cleaning up the like. Yeah. It's always sort of having this incognito. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And as I said, like, great question. And it doesn't affect the ad firms, but it does affect like our understanding of how retailers work in this space. Great question. Yeah.
The credibility level and the fake low quality traditional, those are determined by your judgment of the source. So yeah. So there's two credibility notions. One of them is at the producer level. And there we are relying on these lists that I mentioned before that are by fact checkers and scholars. And we did robustness checks to see what happens if I use one list versus the other. And the sort of results are substantially different. For the credibility of the ad servers, there we are relying on privacy and security researchers lists, but we are extending that by looking at, because they change a lot. There are all kinds of shady ones that come up every day. So we look at the URLs in our list and really we actually have lots of malware and viruses there as well. So we use that to extend those lists. So if that pan were from John Lewis, that would be credible. But if it were from something that was on your ad server this as being not credible, then it would get the different score. It's based on the source. It's not based on the
So based on the
outcome or
source
ad.
for, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing for both ad servers and the producers we identify at the domain level. So this one is, yes, it's all the same. So it's if the producer is classified as fake, it's fake. And for the credibility of the ad server, if we find even one malware served by a domain, we're like, this is a bad domain. So it's a binary decision that we make. Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier, I'm sure you can explain this more, but you're saying your question is whether blocking these fake sites or these low quality sites would decrease the spread of misinformation. Do people on who has the option to block that source?
Yeah, so it would be both the ad firms and the retailers have the option. So ad firms can say, I am no longer working with you. So they can say to zerohedge.com, you're done. I'm not serving ads on your platform or on your website. Similarly, retailers can have blacklists. It's challenging though. Like if you don't have a big marketing department dealing with these things, especially as dynamic as they are, is challenging. Some of these ad firms make it easier to have a dynamic list. Like Google claims to provide that option, but I've had discussions with them and they are also saying that the retailers are not taking that option. We all know like defaults are strong. So yeah, it's the ad firms can make that decision at the domain level. They can make it at whatever level, but they can make it at the domain level and say, no Zero Hedge, no Breitbart, I'm not going to work with you anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
Question. So following what you said, I'm a bit confused because you said like Google, they can block zero, but why would they want to block a publisher rather than the websites rather than the producer?
For us, these are equivalent. So the website, like the InfoWars is the publisher. They publish at infowars.com. So if they say, I'm not working with the InfoWars anymore, they can say, I'm not going to serve any ads on the infowars.com domain. So those are equivalent in our case because we're looking at web publishing.
So is the problem that your website is producing and publishing false information on articles rather than like your ads itself?
Yes, exactly. The people who are trying to stop here are the publishers, or the bad news producers. It's just the ads are giving them money. And Google in the middle is acting as the middleman, basically funneling money to them. If Google says, I'm not working with you anymore, they're not going to have that easy access. And also like Google, for instance, I should probably go back to that concept, but it's like there are certain ad firms that are really much better, like they're a lot more efficient. So if they are effective, they're to say, I'm no longer working with you, that is a big cost to these publishers that make money out of these basically every time you load a page. Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Okay, so the first question was, to what degree are they ad supported? We found that 75% of all news producers across the three categories are display ad supported, which is a pretty large number for the web, but it's comparable to our past study in 2016. We had another study where we're looking at the overall web ecosystem, and we found that news was the highest in display ad reliance. So the numbers are still comparable to let's say 4 years ago. But what's more interesting to us is how much more or less reliant fake news is, for instance, compared to traditional news. We went in there expecting these outrageously bad producers to be more ad reliant, and we saw the opposite. So we saw that, for instance, the median number of ad servers for fake and traditional news were 6 and 8 respectively. So traditional news is showing you more ads, and they're basically working with more ad servers as well. But I should have seen that coming because there's a very clear explanation as to why this happens, and the answer was in my paper a couple of years back, which was that long tail content providers have a lower tendency to show ads, mostly because they can't monetize. Like you just need enough traffic to monetize to set something up. And a lot of these fake news producers or the low quality news producers are new, they don't have as much traffic, and basically not as worth it to set things up. So that's that 2016 paper. But so when you account for the monthly traffic and just for how many years they have been around, indeed these bad categories like clickbait and the fake news categories are indeed showing a lot more ads and working with a lot more ad servers compared to traditional news. So they are trying and they're trying to get there. So now the second question was how concentrated this ad reliance is on a small number of top credible ad servers. When you think about market concentration, it's generally Gini coefficient that's used. So Gini coefficient is pretty high, 0.83 and 81 for the subcategories within low credibility news. And if you look at this plot, here on the x-axis we have the top X credible ad servers. So this is basically various Google ad servers, if you will, right? And how much of the cumulative ad traffic they are accounting for 3 different groups. So you can see that the top 10 servers are accounting for roughly 30% of the traditional news ad traffic. So basically we weight by traffic because it's the more a domain is seen, the more important they are. But we had a different analysis in the paper as well if you're interested. But that 30% is much lower compared to the 61% that we saw for fake news, right? So they're a lot more reliant on this, like just 10 servers are serving 61% of the ad traffic. So if we can kind of convince a handful of ad firms that own these servers, you can make a big dent here. The third question was how valuable are these to the ad firms themselves? Here we have to do a bit more because most of our analysis at the server level, but each firm can have multiple servers. So Google, for instance, has 10 or more. So here, if you're looking at, we had the analysis for the different categories. I'm just going to hit the upgrade, just the bad stuff here. So Google alone is accounting for roughly 50%, 48% of the fake news ad traffic. Right? But they're only making 0.000008% of their revenue, according to our back of the envelope calculations, which we tried both like pay per click and per view. The result is similar. They're really making negligible amounts of money, but they are really important to these producers. Yeah.
How do you get that data?
So it is back of the envelope. So basically what we're doing is we have their traffic, which is from similarweb.com for each domain. So for each publisher, we know how many monthly visitors they get. And we basically used the industry standards for how much is paid for per view, per click. You would think it's an upper bound because that includes more prestigious publishers. So these publishers could not, charge more. So using that and using Google announces its revenue, we can do this back of the envelope calculation to see how much they're making from this yearly and how does that compare to the Google revenue.
Is that revenue from all sources from Google?
Yeah. So I mean, right. So, but display is a big part, but I believe it was like, I shouldn't, would be like half, it wouldn't be like 99% of, so it still is negligible in that sense, I think. But really, basically, the point is that these low credibility news are heavily reliant on these very few top credible ad firms, and it would cost them very little to blacklist these news producers. So the second part is now we're turning to the advertisers part, where I will say that the data that we have, unfortunately, is sort of weaker, given that there's a lot of targeting that's happening in the online world. We can only look at things incognito mode because we don't really know who's visiting each domain. Unfortunately, those kinds of profiles are not accessible to outside researchers. But with that, we are asking still a similar set of questions. from a retailer or brand centric focus, you can imagine that them advertising on low credibility sites have some benefits, but we can't really get at that because again, we don't know, this targeting situation is making it hard to assess that. But we can get at this cost question somewhat in that even if it was sort of incognito mode, to the degree that we are seeing these ads, advertisers on these sites, we can sort of keep them accountable and in a way sort of similar to the Sleeping Giants campaign, because we know that consumers like to avoid retailers that they perceive to be socially irresponsible and unethical, and that really changes brands' behaviors in general in advertising. And for instance, that's why they, avoid porn sites and so forth, right? And they're really careful when it comes to TV advertising, but that connection sort of got broken a little bit in this real-time buying markets, and there are sort of contacts everywhere. And as a result, some advertisers have faced brand concerns due to them being seen on these low credible news. So our thinking is, if we can build a system, if we can keep doing this, and we can build a tool to kind of keep these retailers accountable, can we provide ad tech activists the right set of information for them to get retailers in line, basically. So that's the question of trying to understand which kind of retailers are we seeing here. And then the publisher-centric focuses again, not ad firms, but if retailers were to say, I'm no longer working with you, how would that affect the disinformation ecosystem, and how many retailers would we need to convince and so forth to be able to get there? So the first steps are basically the same. The fourth step is a little different because here we are interested in the retailers. So we had a bunch of hypotheses related to retailer popularity. Big and small brands act differently. So there's some ideas we have from marketing research for that. And we also want to understand how things vary across market sectors. If certain types of market sectors are supporting this disinformation space more than the others. This study was after the first one, so we had more time to collect data. So this was a 9-month period, 3.6 million ads served by, you can see that 63,000 retailers. I think there are a really long tail of big list of retailers here. So the answer to the first question was, what kind of retailers are we seeing on what kind of websites? Here we have total advertisements on all sites. This is sort of log scale. The more you are here, the more they are advertising on the web across traditional and low credibility news. We're using log odds with reshape priors to understand if they are more strongly affiliated with low credibility news or more strongly affiliated with traditional news, based on basically just how often they're seen on different sites. And what you can see here is that there are sites like Donald J. Trump, perhaps not surprising that it's more affiliated with misinformation sites. Perhaps also not surprising that US concealed carry is also up there, given that misinformation space is sort of asymmetrical. Most consumption is by right-wing consumers who also have stronger feelings, or they're more gun rights as opposed to gun safety. But we also see Amazon.com, that is a really big brand that is a lot more seen a lot more on these suspicious, dubious domains, right? So our goal is that, again, these kinds of accountability measures can get these retailers in line. I won't have time to go through this in this talk, but we again looked at this question about market sectors and retailer popularity tiers, and we didn't see as much difference. So this is, I would say, once we have better data in terms of, if we had better data in terms of targeting, the market sectors could be different. Again, we're looking at here the incognito mode, where I guess in that space, all the sectors are sort of equal in terms of how bad they are. The thing that was surprising to us was this retailer popularity tiers. We were expecting, because these big brands have these marketing departments, they could be sort of more brand aware. They would be avoiding these misinformation sites more, and sort of in aggregate, on average, we did not see that, which was surprising.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How did you measure their popularity?
So that is based on online. So there's the similar. There are multiple lists out there, and they are basically giving you multiple ways. So this one is the web domain. You have like if it's in the top 10 web domains, top 100 web domains. So it's web domains that are ranked based on their traffic. Yeah. We're using that. So not like in terms of how much money they're making. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
Can I just, so are these, are these kind of market-based advertisements, or is it possible that these are direct connections with?
So we don't, we don't use the direct ones here. We only are focusing on the real-time buying markets. So there are some sites that are like Infowars that are like big enough that they can actually have these direct advertiser to retailer ones, and those we're not capturing here. These are all real-time buying markets. But so that's what really we are targeting right now. But I think we should be thinking more like broader when we are building these.
So the fact that some of them are more represented there means that they intentionally have preferred to bid for.
So that's a great, I mean, the thing is they don't have as much control, like as I said, like if they have blacklisted, they will not be entered to the bid. But if they haven't blacklisted, what they're doing is just saying when someone loads a page, they're looking for a particular profile. If you're not a sophisticated retailer, you don't have this information about if they're not using it, they're not using it, I guess. So if they're using it, then you would expect that they would be lower, but not everybody does.
Well, unless it's their strategy.
Yeah.
So assume that Donald J. Trump.
Yes, exactly.
Picks to.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Right, and it might be again the way that it is. Like they know that that's the that's the kind of site that they want, but not in terms of the profile of the cookie that we are using, because we're doing incognito. So it could be imagine it could be even higher than this.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so and so then looking at the publisher perspective, this is similar to the one that I showed for the ad firms, but now we're looking at it at the retailer side. So here we're looking at retailer popularity tiers, again, what we have mentioned, which is their ranking on the web. And if you focus on that 1 million line, what you can see that is that the retailers with better ranking than 1 million account for half of the fake news ad traffic, according to our analysis. This is basically 22% of our retailers. So 14,000 retailers collectively make up 50% of fake news ad traffic. And I want you to compare that to our ad firm analysis, where it was only 10 servers that were accounting for the same thing, right? So it's really sort of, you just need to do a lot more when you're thinking at the retailer side as opposed to the ad firm side. But there's also, I mean, the other thing is though, you have to convince more people, but retailers or brands are more consumer facing. So they might be more sort of amenable to your campaign than the middleman ad servers that don't really have as much brand recognition and perhaps less amenable to our strategy of trying to convince them. But things are changing over time. So the thing that we were looking for, we actually saw it over time. What we're seeing is that the big advertisers seem to be slowly moving away from this low credibility news producers. They are seen less and less. And so basically as a result, these low credibility news producers have to go to or get their ads from the lower tier brands as well, which hopefully also means that their websites look shadier as a result as well.
Where would you attribute? What would you attribute the cause of this?
Yeah, so I think I would imagine that the ad tech consumer activism stuff is playing a role here, because they, more and more they're seeing consumers that are angry and they need to act on it. And again, it's not like they don't have a place to advertise. So it's just I think it's more like fighting the defaults, because you can do that quietly and you don't have to even just say. Yeah, I think that would be my guess. but we can't make a causal claim. Okay, so in sum, we're seeing that low credible news are ad reliant, ad firms, and to a lesser degree, advertisers blacklisting such producers holds promise, some making a change here. We're observing some meaningful differences over time, suggesting that the market is adjusting, perhaps due to consumer activism. And there's really increasing interest in the space, I would say. And I think that the data science and measurement work here can provide the weapons for these activists to enact change. Sleeping Giants was one of them, but there are Check My Ads is another responsible ad tech company in the US. There are examples of that in the UK as well. Conscious Advertising Network is an interesting effort that does similar things. So we actually currently are running a semi-structured interview-based study where we are talking to these activists, trying to understand what kind of tools we can build to help them. And we are seeing that they are really, they want this data to be able to make the case. So here's one quote that I have from our study from one of these ad tech activists, where she's saying, this is very helpful because I kind of work on pressuring brands to do better with misinformation. So for me, this is useful data that enables me to make a pitch to brands. With meetings in Amazon, I can say, look, data from, so, like they want some basically authoritative body to give them this data so that they can use it in their campaigns. But I really have to point out there are many limitations to this work. We did not account for the effect of targeting. This is important for the retailer analysis. We are looking at real-time auctions, which I think it's really important for us to tackle, and a lot of the effort is there. But more effort to look at direct sales could be more like for targeted ways of trying to take down some producers. And also so our counterfactual analysis is like just money disappears, but there could be substitutions that are important to account for. Perhaps more importantly, there is this, we are using these lists that somehow, just fell off the sky, but really defining these low credible producers, identifying them at scale is a really big challenge. And it's a continuous challenge that whenever you talk to these ad firms, they point to that. And in our interviews to all of the ad tech activists were like, how do you define misinformation is the first question that they ask you. And also we're just looking at the money side of things, but we can't really say, based on this data, the markets should be used to regulate disinformation, because there are all kinds of other considerations like the values of society, if you want market to play such a role. So that's not what I can't really say that, but I think that's a valuable conversation for us to have. Okay, so I had a couple of slides. I'll very quickly, so it was basically about like defining these, the degree to which there is agreement on who are producers of misinformation. So I'm just very quickly pointing to this paper from 2 years ago, where we did this meta-analysis of research on mis and disinformation, identified the list, and wanted to understand how much they agree. The bottom line is, unfortunately, at the domain level, there is very little agreement. For instance, only 6% of the domains that are across these 5 lists are considered sort of low credibility by all, right? So there is a lot of variation. And that really affects if you're trying to understand prevalence and exposure, because some lists are very small, some are very long. That really, so if you're looking at, for instance, leading up to the 2016 election on Twitter, how much misinformation there was about the presidential candidates, you would say 3% based on one list, 42% based on another list. So it's really important to keep that in mind and take it with a grain of salt, the point estimates given this. But the good news is, there is really high agreement if you look at sort of the temporal analysis or agenda setting differences and similarities across producers. And that, I think, tells me that it's, the fact checkers have a similar sort of criteria for what is a producer of misinformation. It's just that they have limited time and limited capacity and looking at the domains at a different order. So some of them haven't really gotten to some of the other ones that are being considered, right? So that tells us something about, we can maybe use classifiers at scale. I'll skip this. Basically, the point is that not that easy, right? It is the classifiers. If you look at the existing classifiers, unfortunately, there's little consistency across data sets, metrics, and other sample techniques used, and sort of their performance varies drastically. And there are also biases we've seen across all classifiers we use. They actually had a higher false positive rate for conservative domains. So they're like labeling conservative domains as misinformation. So that's obviously important concern to address before we really deploy them in the wild. But this is not a concern specific to disinformation. This is a problem that's generally important to consider for machine learning research, as Hoffman et al. Has pointed out. But so basically, this is sort of pointing out that it's an ongoing battle to identify these producers. Okay, so point is, consumers, policymakers, they interact with this market. Us researchers, we can give them the right data to empower them to make some change here. Hopefully, that's it. And most importantly, students, they do great work. They take all the credit, all the bad stuff in the work. It's because of me. All the good stuff is because of them. So yeah, thank you.
Questions. So, I think the whole idea here is the ad revenue is very important to these fake news websites. But is it true? Do you have any figure that says this accounts for like 80% of the revenue that they are receiving every year, so that it's important for us to start from here? Or maybe it's only one.
So these are all online publishers.
Right.
So the revenue that they get is from ads.
Because I'm thinking like maybe you have subscription. So
right.
Pay you subscription.
So yeah, that's a great question. So we do not have that analysis here, but for you to have a subscription system, you really need to be like, there are, even in the traditional news world, very handful of publishers that can pull that off. And even there, how much money that they're getting from these people signing up versus people like the ads revenue is taking over. So I guess you're right that we've made that assumption that the long tail ones, they're just simply not going to be able to get that kind of, because people are sort of also expecting things to be free online. But we should do that. We should get a random sample of these. My guess is that you're going to get near zero that have any people who are signing up to pay sort of pass through paywalls.
Right. I mean, I was still thinking along these lines too, that these are people obviously easy to do already, since they're reading this kind of content. So they could have merchandise they sell, or some kind of events, local events. So they could do other revenue streams. Right.
So so that to me is more in the advertiser, and it is true that they can be the advertiser and the publisher can be the same. So InfoWars is a good example of that. It still takes you to another site to get you to buy the merchandise. But you're right. That is at least you would think that the top ones will be able to do that. We should definitely. That's a great point. We should definitely look into that. The starting assumption was the money is coming from advertising. Yeah.
Another question I have is, did you also examine the quality of the ads?
Not in this study, but we looked at. We actually were, when we were starting this classifier work that I ended with, we were going to have this classifier based on the structure of the HTML and just how high quality the content is. And I think we had their ads as well. It is predictive of if something is if a domain is low versus high credibility. And as I said before, when you look at the degree to which they rely on different retailers is also changing over time. So the more you go down the retailer rank, the worse the graphics are going to look and so forth. So I can imagine that as bigger retailers move away from them, it's going to look worse and worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as a reader or a consumer of the website.
Yeah.
You give me a website and you show me the ads on it.
Yeah.
The higher the quality of the ads, I would actually think the website is more credible.
Yeah, it goes both ways. So exactly, and there's sort of marketing research that suggests that people adjust, they adjust their posture of both the content provider and the advertiser. So advertiser, if you're in this bad space, they're like, oh, this is a bad this is a bad brand. And similarly, if good stuff in there, maybe like, well, clearly this must be a good thing. Coca-Cola is in here. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I know that wasn't the focus of looking at the content, but you suggested that you looked somehow at the content of the HTML. And everything. Did you notice any difference in the way that the ads were served, for example, in the content? So, because I know some ads will be very generic and like point to a brand, and that's it, but others will say either the name of a specific product or some other info about that.
We did not do that. I guess we had this semi-supervised learning technique to identify market sectors, and there we were using we were using the information from the lending domain. So yeah, we did not use the ad itself, the graphics of the ad itself. I guess that would require sort of more image processing work that we haven't done. So yeah, let's say that it's a very fascinating space in terms of what kind of ads are people seeing and how is that affecting, like I'm also can imagine like a user study trying to understand how you can change people's perceptions as well, but we haven't looked at that. Great question.